Shalom everyone, and welcome back to Oxygen for the Soul. This week's class is dedicated Le'ilei Nishmat and in loving memory of Moshe Dabah, Moshe ben Gilsom, Alav Shalom, by his wife Ivette and children. The neshama should have an ultimate aliyah, and you should only have nachat from the children and Bezrat Hashem, the grandchildren. This week's perasha is perasha Bamidbar, and the perasha itself is the beginning of the fourth of the fifth book of Moses. And if you actually open up any translation, you'll find that certainly in the secular world, the book of Bamidbar is called the book of Numbers. And it always bothered me, why call it Numbers, right? The word Bamidbar means in the desert. It's clear in the first few psukim that the reason why it's called Numbers because God asks Moshe to take an accounting of the people. And Rashi tells us that God is counting the people because it shows how much He loves them. You count things that are important. I have a son who's getting married in about, I think, less than 40 days now. I only know that because his kala made him a countdown meter, literally like a box of like all the days, and he X's it every single night, counting down. And when we're excited for a particular moment, we count. So there's a countdown that's happening over there, and just like God wants to count the people, not because of strength in numbers, but because of this deep desire He has for each and every single Jewish soul. Now, the Gemara uses a different set of words or titles to describe the five books of Moshe. So, for example, the book of Bereshit, also known as Genesis, which is a comparable translation, the book of Bereshit is known as Sefer HaYesharim, the book for the straight, right? The book of the righteous. The book of Exodus is called, or Shemot, is called the book of Sefer HaGeulah, the book of redemption, right? The book of Leviticus, or Vayikra, is called the book of Torat Kohanim, Sefer Torat Kohanim. Right, the Torah of the Kohanim, which is what the book of Vayikra is about. Devarim, which is the last of the five books, is called Mishnah Torah. That's the review of everything that Moshe taught the Jewish people. And then you have Sefer Bamidbar, which is called what? Sefer Pikudim. The Gemara itself actually calls the book of Bamidbar the book of countings, or the book of numbers. So what is the relationship here between the book of Numbers and the general stories that you find in the book of Bamidbar? Bamidbar has some of the most interesting stories. Most of us remember so much of Bereshit because we learned it in our youth. Our parents speak about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and their stories are so remarkable. But when it comes to, and the book of Exodus, Shemot, we've seen the movies, and the Prince of Egypt, and the Ten Commandments. So it becomes super clear. We have a vivid picture memory of what those stories are about. But the book of Bamidbar is different, right? You don't really hear much about it. And for those of you that are more serious about your Judaism, the book of Bamidbar has so many awesome lessons. Definitely worth your while in spending time and investing in understanding what those stories actually are. So there are two accountings that are taking place in the book of Bamidbar. Okay, the first accounting is right here. When the Jewish people leave Egypt, you want to do a census. How many people left Egypt? We know there are 600,000 men that stood at Mount Sinai. 600,000 men between the ages of 20 and 60, not including their wives. That's 1.2 million. Not including their children, anywhere between 1.2 and 2.5 million people stood at Sinai. And there's a second accounting that takes place. So the first accounting takes place when the Jewish people leave the land of Egypt. And the second accounting takes place when the Jews are about to leave the desert and go into the land of Israel. So this idea is based on the Netziv. And he says as follows. He says, why are we calling it the book of counting? Right? Call it the book of the desert. Now, why would I call it the book of the desert? You know, I've had the privilege of leading and running many groups around the world. And one of my favorite activities on my Israel trips is taking my group into the desert and letting them like a night walk through the desert, and then do like a meditation in the Midbar. And I tell them that the word Midbar, right, the desert, comes from the word Midaber, right? It comes from the word to speak. There's something powerful and profound about being in the desert where it's quiet and all you have is the stars and the sand, It's a unique experience. And what ends up happening when you are able to finally quiet your mind, there is an inner voice that becomes clear. It's not an accident that the Jewish people left Egypt and went into the desert. Why would I do that? I would take the people into the desert to give them a proper experience. What's that experience? Number one is break free from their psychological, mental constraints that they have that was put upon them in Egypt for being slaves. Give them the opportunity of feeling what it's really like to be free. And the only way to do that is to break away from what society has provided for us, the construct of what society says is normal, hierarchy, power. Get rid of all of that. What was the world they were living in? They were living in a world of miracles. You had the manna, the man, you had the be'er, the water, you had the cloud of fire and water. You were completely living on a spiritual plane. As a matter of fact, we know that when Amalek, the sworn enemy of the Jewish people, come and they attack the Jewish people, what ends up happening? They can't fight. They look up to God. They look up to Moshe. And as long as Moses is holding up his hands, everything is working beautifully. Everything is amazing. The Jewish people are winning the war, not because of their military prowess and might, and they didn't have Krav Maga back then. They didn't know what they were doing, right? But they were simply winning because of the spiritual protection that Moses and God was offering them. Now, at the end of the book of Bamidbar, the end of this book, there's a second counting, right? After Pinchas, right? After there's a story of someone by the name of Pinchas, who is a young man from the tribe of Aaron, who's a Levi, but is a Kohen, who ends up killing Cosbi and Zimri, another leader of the Jewish people, who ends up having a licentious relationship with a Midianite. And there's a massive, almost like a civil war and a plague that breaks out. And there's another census that happens there. This is at the end of the 40 years in the desert, right? And now the Jewish people are about to get ready to get into the land of Israel, and now they're no longer getting the manna, they're no longer getting the water, they're preparing to learn how to live a natural reality outside of the cosmic spiritual forces that nourished them for so long. Because God ultimately doesn't want us living in that state. He wants us to live in a reality where we are owners of our own fate, where we have control, where we can choose to and decide what we want to be, not just born into something. I can choose to become something more. My traits don't define who I am. The circumstances don't define. My choices determine those circumstances. So we go into the Midbar because the Midbar itself is a place of midaber. What do we hear there? Our inner voices reminding us of who we can be, or what we should be accomplishing, asking the hard questions. Are we just so distracted with life? Are we so distracted with work? Are we so distracted with our wants, our desires, that we're forgetting about the deeper parts of who we are? So we bedafka go into a midbar to clarify that for ourselves. Now there's a second accounting, Sefer Pikudim. What are we counting? We're counting down this unique opportunity for the Jewish people to achieve something more. Okay, what is that? What's the ultimate goal of Judaism? The ultimate goal is for us to achieve a level of independence. That's what we want. The Torah wants you to be an independent thinker. The Torah wants you to be someone who could make his own choices, who could stand on his own 2 feet, someone who does not need to be constantly supported, someone who's able to make decisions on their own, someone who has the freedom to choose. That is ultimately what it means to be a Jew. Judaism is an expression of not the constraints. Judaism are the laws, the rules that allow us to play the game. How do you play a game if you don't know the rules? The rules teach us how to play. It creates the parameter. That's what's happening in the book of Bamidbar. The book is now the application of so much of what the Jewish people have learned from Moses, from God, from their experiences, going through the therapy almost of the pain and the suffering of being slaves for so long, and now breaking free to become something more. The pasuk says like this: "Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe b'midbar Sinai bo'el moed." Right? God says to them when in the Midbar Sinai in the desert, and this happens be'echad chodesh hasheni b'shana hasheni l'tzetam me'eretz Mitzrayim. This happens the first day of the second month in the second year after the Exodus. Okay, so this is still at the very beginning. Listen to what it says next. It says, "Su'u et rosh kol adat b'nei Israel." take the sum of all of the Jewish people, the Kihila, Kol Adat, the congregation of the children of Israel, Mishpachotam, according to their families, Lebeit Amavotam, according to their families, Bamidbar Shemot, a head count of every male according to their names. Kol Zachar Legulgulotam. Okay, now it says like this: it says Su et Kol Rosh Kol Adat Bnei Israel. The word Su'u Roshechem, lift up their heads. What does that mean to take accounting, to lift up their heads? Why does it say that? If we're just taking accounting, it says why does it say like Su or Lispor et Rosh Kol Adat Bnei Israel? Say something else. Why do you got to tell me that you're su'uing? The same word su'u means to raise up, over here it means to count. And there's a very deep lesson over here. You see, we see life and we have a choice as how we want to respond to the world around us. We can either choose to respond by doing nothing. Oh, I just see, I observe. I'm what's it called? Just a bystander, an observer to the world around me. Or I have the power of lifting up. This is a choice we have to make, my friends. What kind of a world do we want to live in? Here the Jewish people had spent so many hundreds of years, between 210 years or 400 years as slaves in Egypt. They're finally out. What does it mean to su'u et kol, et su'u et rosh kol adapri, so lift up their heads? What does that mean? It means like this: no matter how broken someone may be, no matter how downtrodden someone may feel, you have the power of lifting them up. You have the power of changing a person's emotional reality. You have the ability of making a real difference in someone's life. You could choose to create a world where people who are sad now have the ability of expressing happiness. That's what the word of Bamidbar, the Sefer Bamidbar is this. It's the choice the Jewish people make to either lift themselves up out of the spiritual, physical poverty, or to continue to descend into a world of selfishness and sadness. That, my friends, is a choice. Now, a person can make that choice, but I could see someone who's unhappy. I could go over to them and say, hey, my friend, turn that frown upside down. Let's change your reality. Let's think about how we could work on being happy. Let's not focus on the things that we don't have. Let's appreciate all the things that we do have. We have to sometimes in life go into a midbar, into a desert, into a place where we're so removed from all the materialism, so I could just jolt back myself into reality, so I could actually feel a connection to what is real. That's what people want. You know what people desperately want? People want to feel alive. That's what people want. People come to classes because they're looking to hear, to learn about how do I connect to truth and reality. That's what this is. This is an opportunity to remove ourselves from the shadow that all too often clouds our mind and distracts us from doing what is true and right, and gives us the ability of doing something much more profound, of counting and helping people. So what can we do? I can raise myself up out of a state of unhappiness by investing my time in helping the people around me. I have the choice of making myself happy. I could look at the mirror and say, I want to be happy today. This is my choice. Now, I don't think it's an accident that we'll read all of this right before the holiday of Shavuot, which is coming up. If you don't know, Shavuot this year comes out right into Shabbat, so it's Shabbat and it's Shavuot. So the first Shavuot meal is Saturday night. The custom is to spend all night, Saturday night, awake and learning Torah to show the deep excitement that we have for receiving the Torah. Now, is it an accident? Is it coincidence that we read the perasha right before Shavuot? The answer is no. What's the correlation? Correlation, I believe, is as follows. If you want to be someone who is able to experience Matan Torah, the matan, the giving, or the matana, the gift of the Torah, have you emptied yourself out in preparation for it? Have you humbled yourself? Are you willing to raise your hands up? Are you willing to fight for a connection to your beliefs? Because if you're not, you're going to miss out the whole entire beauty of what the Chag is about. The holiday is a paradigm of a marriage between husband and wife, between God and his people, or God and humanity. Okay? So what ends up happening is that there's this deep just reality of all systems that start with a burst of clarity, that burst of clarity fades away. And in order to maintain that intimacy, that connection, that love, that inspiration, you have to be willing to fight for it. So how do we fight for it? Number one is we empty ourselves out. The biggest reason why people get into fights in relationships is because of my wants versus your wants, my needs versus your needs. But if you make yourselves into a midbar, if you're able to go into the midbar Sinai, you wanted to go into that Sinai desert, you remove yourself from all the things that are distracting, you really double down on the things that are most important. I just did I was at a funeral on Sunday for a family friend. His mother died at 102 years old. She was 102 when she passed away. Beautiful, amazing Holocaust survivor, a very remarkably strong woman, very strong woman. And even though she was 102, and she lived a life where she had grandchildren and she had children who were all doctors and successful, there's certain things that are worth more than anything else in the world. Having one more moment with your mom, having one more moment with a loved one is more valuable than any possession you have. But we spend so much of our time trying to find possessions, trying to fill our time with things that are somewhat superficial. Shavuot is a holiday that begs us to ask the question, if you want a real connection to Torah, if you want a real connection to something that is profound, if you want a connection to the Almighty, you want a connection to the Infinite, you want to live a life of meaning and happiness, you have to empty yourself out. That doesn't mean that you don't enjoy the finer things of life. That does not mean that you can't have a nice home and a nice car and go on a nice vacation. Again, have all of it, but not in lieu of a relationship with the Almighty, not in lieu of a relationship with the self. Sefer Bamidbar is a deep book about the trials and the tribulations, the choices the Jewish people make with this new information about living in a world of spirituality versus a world of gashmiut, about living in a world of humanity having the ability of expressing, choosing to express their internal greatness versus just descending into the animalistic stuff, the base nature of a human being. The book of Bamidbar is a book of numbers, because numbers have meaning, they count. The question is, are you going to count? Are you going to be part of those people that are going to be counted, that are going to stand this Shavuot, learning, trying, begging, just interested in this connection? The book is about journeys. The book is not about destinations. The book is about the process that human beings go through to achieve a deep level of connection. That's what the book is about. You want to understand why it's called a book of numbers? Because unfortunately for you and for I, those are things that you and I deeply appreciate. Those are things that you and I deeply understand. Oh, how much is that? 100, 200, 1,000, 10,000, 2,500, a million? Wow, that's got to be important. My friends, while money is important, okay, but there's some things that are more important. What's more important than money is your ability to choose to become a greater human being, to lift up the heads of those people that are sad, to lift up your own head when you're feeling sad, to make a choice that allows you to delve deeper into expressing the truest expression of your identity. With that in mind, the meditation for the next few days is emptying yourself out, relinquishing your connection to the material world, not because you don't want it, I want you to have it, but for a few days, create a space where you can delve deeper into who you want to be. And then you'll find yourself after Shavuot expressing the most amazing parts of who you are. In that process, you change the world. You bring a tremendous amount of light that forever changes our futures. Wishing you all a Shabbat Shalom, a Chag Sameach, a world of clarity, of truth, of nachat, of simcha, and bracha.